Hi, I'm going to talk about the FNAF lore, the first 6 games, over the next 6 weeks. Now chances are, you've probably heard a lot of this from other people already, but my own theory deviates from what most people would consider to be the truth, so it's important for me to start from the beginning and clue you in on what I've changed, because it will play into things later on. For the most part, games 1, 2, and 3 are pretty much what you already expect, but 4, 5, and 6 are going to deviate a lot. So the new information on the first 3 games that I'm going to put into this are more important for the sake of those latter 3 games than they are from the first. So for the first 3 videos, just gotta bear with me. We'll get to the good stuff eventually. Alright, so let's start. FNAF 1. Let's just run through the basics of what actually happens. You play as a night guard called Mike Schmidt. There's animatronics walking around trying to kill you. You fend them off for 5 nights and the game is over. So let's get the big question out of the way. Why are the animatronics moving? That shouldn't be possible. That is an excellent observation. Luckily, there are some newspapers on the wall that explain everything. You see this sign? Now sometimes this sign can change to one of 4 newspapers, and when we look at those, we can actually understand why the animatronics are moving. The first one says that 2 kids have gone missing. A second one says another 3 have gone missing. It says that the kids were lured into a back room by an employee in a mascot costume. Then the papers go on to say that while the suspect was caught, he was never convicted because the bodies were never found. And this third paper tells us that the animatronics started to smell, they started to leak blood and mucus. Lovely image. Which tells us exactly where this killer hid the bodies. So why can the animatronics move around? They're haunted by ghosts. Ghosts of kids. Kids that were killed by an employee of this building. And that's why they're after you, the night guard. Speaking of the night guard, I'm sure your next question is, why does this guy keep coming back to this building if every single night he's being attacked by monstrous robots? At this point in the series, it's unclear. But there is something unique about one of the animatronics. Out of the 5, the most interesting one is this yellow bear that randomly shows up. When he does, he's accompanied by the phrase, "It's me." Now this could very well just be the kids trying to communicate with us, tell us that they're still here. The other 4, once they enter the office, do not hesitate to kill you. But when the yellow bear sits in your office right in front of you, he kind of just doesn't do anything unless you do nothing and then he kills you. But the point is, it's almost like he's trying to communicate with you rather than attack you, which makes me think the child that is possessing this yellow bear seems to know us. And if that's the case, then that would explain why our character is constantly coming back every night. Because it's definitely not for the pay he's getting for this job, and we actually have to talk about the paycheck he gets because it's surprisingly important to the story. For all the stress that Mike went through, he is only paid minimum wage. And because it's minimum wage, it actually allows us to figure out what year this game takes place in. By comparing it alongside American minimum wage rates over the past few decades, we can prove that this game takes place in the early 90s. But we can do one better. Since we know we receive our paycheck on Friday, and the date on the paycheck says the 12th of November, all we have to do is look back through some old calendars and we'll find that the only year in the early 1990s where the 12th of November was on a Friday is 1993. Why does that matter so much? Because it allows us to figure out when Fazbear Entertainment began. To any newcomers, this isn't going to seem like a big deal, but to longtime fans like myself, what I'm about to say, is a massive bombshell. A detail I have never seen anyone ever bring up, not even game theory, despite all the timelines they've made. Phone guy, you want to clue our audience in on what I'm talking about?
If I were forced to sing those same stupid songs for 20 years and I never got a bath, I'd probably be a bit irritable at night too.
20 years. And since we know Phone Guy only worked the week before us, meaning it's still 1993 when he's saying this, it means that Fazbear Entertainment started in 1973, which has massive implications for the timeline of this series moving forward. For now though, I'm going to leave it here. Since this is guaranteed to be the shortest episode of the 6, there's a few things I want to talk about before I leave. Point number 1, there are multiple endings in this series. And I'm not talking about the games individually having good and bad or true and fake endings. No, I'm talking about outside of the games themselves. Scott's own release schedule for them. I'll give you an example of what I mean. When Scott made the first game, he thought it was going to be the last game he'd ever make. And because of that, the lore, the story behind the first game is so quick and easy to figure out. But of course, the game did really well, so Scott makes more games. So now he plans on making a full trilogy of games. So because he's already planning on making a third game, there are certain mysteries in the second game that go unsolved, but the third game then fills in the blanks. This is also why the story to the fourth game has a lot of us confused, even to this day, because Scott was never planning on making a fourth game. It's only because the third game wasn't particularly scary and he didn't want to let down the audience that gave him a career did he choose to make another game. But now he has a problem. My story was finished with the first 3 games. So if I make a game that's worthy of being the finale, but then the story is lackluster, then we're going to have the same problem again. But how do I incorporate all of the story elements from the previous 3 games, plus all of this new stuff, and have it still make sense? I won't get into the story of FNAF 4 right now, but the point is, in the end, Scott came back a year later with a new story, with a new game, followed up by a 6th game, which wraps everything up. Now the reason this is so important is because it tells us what games were planned at what stages in this franchise, so we know what information Scott was planning ahead when he made a specific game, which tells us what information can be used to solve which problems. So, as an example, a question from FNAF 2 can be solved with information from FNAF 3 because those games were planned together. However, you can't use any information from FNAF 4, 5, or 6 to solve that problem because those games weren't planned when FNAF 2 was made. This might seem initially a bit confusing, but it actually makes solving the lore a little bit easier. Because now, instead of using the entire franchise's worth of information to solve a mystery, you can now limit your scope to the information present in the games that were planned together. So now, instead of a mystery being potentially solved by a whole plethora of information, you now know that the answer is only present in a handful of information. Understand? And finally, just gonna rip this band-aid off right now. The books are not canon. They have their own canon, but it does not coincide with that of the games. Scott said as much when he released the first one. They are a separate continuity. Yes, there are details that are the same in both the games and the books, but there are a lot of stuff in the books that aren't in the games. And for that reason, I think it's best that the books are just avoided entirely. Now, of course, it's possible that there is more connections between the books and the games. But to use the books as evidence for the games doesn't feel right to me. Because there are a lot of things in the books that simply aren't true, that we know for a fact are not true to the games. We can't 100% guarantee that the details that do sound similar are 100% the same in the games. So for that reason, it's better to just ignore them. If there's something important in the games, a future game will tell us. Scott has released games in the series for free. He doesn't come across as the kind of person who would hide important information to the games in a random book. Oh, and the same goes for the movie. There's probably even a better example. There's a lot more in common with the games and the movie, but there are also things that are different. So that's all I wanted to talk about for this first episode. I hope you found it interesting. I'll be releasing videos on the next 5 games over the next 5 weeks, leading up to the 10-year anniversary of the first game, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.